I am 76 years old this year. At this age, people no longer measure time by calendars, but by mornings, by whether they wake up feeling okay or not. I often sit alone by the window, watching sunlight filter through the trees in front of my house, thinking about the changes that have come into my life over the past few years. Not loud changes, not sudden accidents or dramatic illnesses, but very small things, easy to overlook, so subtle that if you don't slow down enough, you won't even realize they're happening. I used to think that when death comes to older people, it comes quickly. One day the heart stops or there's a stroke, and that's it. But now I understand that most of the time, the body begins saying goodbye long before the people around notice. It doesn't shout, it whispers. And if we don't listen, we miss the chance to prepare for the things that matter most. For me, it started with my weight. It sounds strange, doesn't it? I wasn't dieting. I wasn't exercising differently. I still ate 3 meals a day, at least out of habit. But one day I noticed my familiar pair of jeans kept sliding down. I had to punch another hole in my belt. At first I laughed and thought maybe I was losing weight in a healthy way. But then I looked in the mirror and saw that my face looked more hollow, my shoulders thinner, my arms smaller. Not the kind of thinness you see in young people who work out, but the kind that makes you look fragile. The strange thing was that I wasn't hungry. My appetite disappeared without me even noticing. Foods I once loved, apple pie, weekend barbecues, my morning coffee, suddenly didn't appeal to me anymore. I ate because I knew I should, not because my body was asking for food. Sometimes I would sit in front of a plate for a long time, eat a few bites, and feel full, even though I knew I hadn't eaten much at all. My children were worried. They told me to eat more, bought nutritional drinks, protein shakes, vitamins. I understood their concern, but there's something very hard to explain. When the body starts slowing down, it no longer wants to store things. It's like a machine that's been running for too long and now just wants to slow its pace. Forcing it to speed up only makes it more tired. Along with the weight loss came a very clear sense of weakness. I used to be able to stand and cook for an hour. Now 15 minutes makes my back ache. Climbing just a few steps makes my heart beat faster. I find myself sitting down to rest halfway through simple tasks, something I never imagined before. And this didn't happen overnight. It came gradually, little by little, slowly enough that you can convince yourself it's just old age. Then there was the fatigue. Not the kind of tiredness you feel after a busy day, but a deep, heavy exhaustion. I slept enough, sometimes even more than before, but when I woke up, my body still felt weighed down. Some mornings I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time just to gather enough strength to stand. Even simple things like putting on clothes or tying my shoes sometimes made me pause to catch my breath. I started taking naps, then going to bed earlier. Some days I slept more than I was awake, and that confused me. I used to hate daytime naps. I liked being active, liked working, liked feeling useful. But now my body no longer followed my will. It decided when to rest, and it rested a lot. What made me saddest wasn't the fatigue itself, but the feeling that I was slowly becoming a burden. I couldn't do the things I used to. I needed more help. And so I became quieter, not because I didn't want to talk, but because talking also took energy. I listened more, nodded more, and let others speak for me. Sometimes I wondered whether this was a sign of something bigger. And when I looked back at old friends who had passed away before me, I realized they had gone through the same things. They lost weight, they became more tired, they spoke less. Back then, we thought they were just getting weak with age. But now, standing where I am, I understand that was their bodies preparing for the final stretch. If you're listening to this and you see a loved one in these words, please don't panic. This isn't to say that every change leads to death, but when these changes come together, last over time, and don't improve even with rest or better nutrition, it may be time to listen more closely, slow down, and focus on what truly matters. Because when the body begins to whisper, it doesn't need us to fix it anymore. It needs us to be there. After my body started feeling weaker and more tired, I noticed something else changing too, even though at first I didn't want to admit it. My mind. Not severe memory loss like people fear, but very small, hazy moments that made me wonder if I was slowly drifting away from the world. Sometimes I forgot what I was about to say. I'd stand in the middle of a room and forget why I walked in. I'd listen to my daughter telling a story and need a few seconds to understand where it was going. I used to be sharp. I liked debating, asking questions. Now everything seemed slower. Thoughts arrived later. Reactions took longer, as if my brain no longer wanted to run at full speed. Strangely, I could still remember very old things clearly. I remembered the smell of my mother's kitchen when I was a child. I remembered the road I took on my first day of work. But recent things slipped away easily. I forgot the names of new people, forgot what day it was, even forgot whether I had already eaten lunch. These moments confused me and sometimes embarrassed me. I didn't want people to think I was losing it, so I spoke less, not because I had nothing to say, but because I was afraid of saying the wrong thing, repeating myself, or asking questions I had already asked. I chose silence, nodding, smiling. And slowly that silence became a habit. Long conversations also became tiring. I used to enjoy family gatherings full of laughter and noise. Now those sounds sometimes overwhelmed me. I preferred sitting quietly in a corner, listening more than participating. Not because I didn't love my family, but because my mind no longer had the energy to keep up. There were days when I sat for a long time, staring out the window, thinking of nothing in particular. I wasn't sad. I wasn't happy either. It was a strange state, as if my emotions had softened, no longer rising and falling so strongly. Things that once worried me no longer did. Things that once excited me no longer made my heart race. My son once asked, "Dad, are you sad?" I didn't know how to answer. I wasn't sad, but I wasn't the same either. I felt myself slowly turning inward, like when evening comes and everything gently settles. Then there were the minor illnesses. I used to rarely get sick. Even colds passed quickly. But in recent years, I became more susceptible. A mild cold could last weeks. A small cut took a long time to heal. Once I had a urinary tract infection, something I'd never experienced before. I took medication, it improved, but I never recovered as quickly as I used to. What stood out was that each time I got sick, I wasn't just physically tired, but mentally drained too. I felt foggy, had trouble concentrating, and sometimes felt confused over small things. My doctor told me that in older adults, infections don't always show up with high fevers or obvious pain. Sometimes the first sign is a change in thinking, behavior, or alertness. I began to realize that my body no longer repaired itself the way it once did. Even a small bruise took a long time to fade. My skin became thinner, more fragile. I had to be more careful with each step, each movement. And that's when I understood that my defenses were weakening. My family often talked about more aggressive treatment, more medication, more tests. I listened, but deep down I felt something very clear. I didn't want to fight anymore. Not because I wanted to give up, but because I felt I was entering a different stage, where the goal was no longer to extend time at any cost, but to live whatever time remained as gently as possible. I didn't want to be in the hospital anymore. I didn't like the white lights, the machines, the constant monitoring. I wanted to be at home. I wanted to hear birds in the morning. I wanted to feel a loved one's hand holding mine, even if I didn't say much. If you're caring for an older person and notice these changes, please remember that their withdrawal isn't a rejection of love. It's how they adapt to a world that's becoming too fast, too loud for them. Sometimes just sitting beside them without saying anything is already a full presence. I've learned that sometimes the most important thing isn't trying to bring them back to how they used to be, but accepting who they are becoming. Because in that silence, in those long, quiet moments, there is still awareness, still love, just expressed differently. There came a point when I noticed my breathing wasn't the same anymore. Not suddenly, but gradually, like a song slowing down near the end. I didn't notice until one day, after speaking a few sentences in a row, I had to stop to breathe. I used to talk for hours. Now I choose my words, speak slowly, and sometimes stay silent to save energy. Sometimes my breathing is shallow, as if I don't need much air. Other times I take deep breaths, as if my body is reminding me it's still here, still trying. At night, I often wake with a slight shortness of breath, not painful, but enough to make me change position, add pillows, sit up for a while before lying down again. I realized I no longer like lying flat. Lying on my side or sitting slightly upright makes breathing easier. Some nights I sleep in a recliner in the living room where I can look out the window. I listen to the wind, distant cars, and feel calmer than in a bedroom that's too quiet. Along with my breathing came changes in my hands and feet. They're often cold, even when it's not cold outside. My skin looks paler, sometimes slightly bluish at the fingertips. I look at my hands and see veins standing out, as if blood no longer flows as strongly. The doctor said it's because the body is prioritizing blood flow to vital organs. I nodded. I understood. My body knows how to reorganize itself. Some afternoons I sit for a long time without wanting to stand up, not because of pain, but because standing makes me a little dizzy. Every movement needs to be planned. I'm not in a hurry anymore. I don't want to be. Everything moves more slowly now, and I'm starting to see that it isn't as frightening as I once thought. My family, especially my children, sometimes worry when they see my slow breathing and cold hands. I see it in their eyes. I know they're scared. But for me, this feeling isn't panicky. It's like a deep tiredness, but peaceful. There isn't much struggle left inside me. I used to think death would be something violent, but now it feels more like sunset. The light doesn't disappear all at once. It softens, fades, and eventually leaves behind a gentle warmth. I'm not as afraid of the dark anymore. I've gone far enough, lived fully enough, and I feel ready to rest. There are days when I speak very little, not because I have nothing left to say, but because the important things were said long ago. I said I'm sorry. I said thank you. I said I love you. The rest doesn't always need words. I like it when someone simply sits with me. No conversation, no constant questions. Just a hand resting lightly on mine, a quiet presence. I believe that even when I close my eyes, I can still feel that. If you're with an older person and notice these changes, please don't panic. Don't try to wake them when they're sleeping peacefully. Don't worry when they eat less, speak less, breathe more slowly. It's very possible they aren't in pain. It's very possible they're in a state of peace that younger people rarely experience. Healthcare, medication, oxygen, all of these have their place. But there is something more important than all of it: the feeling of being respected, being allowed to slow down, being allowed to let go, being allowed to end the journey in one's own way. I want to say this to anyone listening to my story. Recognizing these signs isn't about fearing death. It's about being more present, about not missing the small but precious moments. A quiet afternoon, a held hand, a shared look without words. The end of a life doesn't have to be a battle. Sometimes it's simply a return. And if I could choose, I would want to leave gently, in the arms of those I love, without noise, without panic, only peace. If you're walking this path with someone, remember you're not alone. Many have gone before you, and even though it's painful, this time can still hold great love if we learn to see it differently. I've lived a long life, and when it's time to rest, what brings me the most peace isn't medicine, but knowing that I was loved, and that I loved fully.